Have you ever sat at a table meant for strangers at your own brother's wedding? Not just forgotten, not just overlooked, deliberately sidelined. Like you're not just invisible, you're inconvenient. That's what it felt like for me. That's how it started. That's when I knew I was done pretending. They say family is forever, but no one tells you what to do when forever starts to feel like a prison sentence. When the people who are supposed to love you the most keep choosing the shinier version of you, the louder, glossier, more marketable sibling, and leaving you behind like the parts of the story that didn't make the cut. I was 31, still playing the role of background character in the Greaves show, starring my older brother, Elias, the golden boy, venture capitalist, media darling, Harvard grad, magazine cover smile, the kind of guy who got applause just for walking into a room and shaking someone's hand. And then there was me, Noah Greaves, the other one, the brother who dabbled in design, even though I was a lead UX strategist at one of Seattle's top firms. I had national brands in my portfolio, six-figure salary, a quiet apartment that overlooked the sound, a good life by every definition that mattered, except in my family. In my family, none of that counted, at least not to my parents, and especially not to my mother. Your brother's wedding is a big deal, she said on the phone 2 weeks before the ceremony. Please try not to wear anything too casual. I was literally standing in my closet, in a suit, custom tailored, Italian wool. But to her, I was probably picturing up in thrifted flannel and a pizza stain. That was always the script, me the awkward, artsy one who didn't understand how the world really worked. Elias, the one who made everything look easy. They had framed photos of him in their hallway, graduating, pitching investors, cutting ribbons at galas. They hung his Forbes 30 under 30 plaque in the living room like it was a family crest. There wasn't a single photo of me past age 16. I checked. When Elias announced his engagement to Maren Caldwell, my parents reacted like they'd just won the lottery. Champagne corks, Instagram announcements, save the dates printed on hand-pressed silk paper. Maren was the daughter of a retired senator and looked like she belonged on the cover of Town and Country. And now she was going to be a Greaves. They planned the wedding like it was the coronation of royalty. I was invited, of course. But let's just say my RSVP could have been lost in the mail and no one would have noticed. Flash forward. Wedding weekend. Napa Valley. Private vineyard estate. The kind of venue where the cheapest bottle of wine on the shelf starts at $500 and the air smells like generational wealth. The rehearsal dinner was held in a glass-walled suite overlooking acres of rolling hills. Every seat had custom name cards, gold foil, ivory linen napkins, personalized menus. I found mine at table 14, tucked away in the back corner next to two great aunts I hadn't seen in a decade and a hedge fund manager from Connecticut who thought my name was Noel. Meanwhile, Elias' college buddies were front and center. Maren's stylist was at the head table. Even Toby Kane, Elias' ex-business partner who ghosted after tanking their second company, had a better seat than I did. I told myself I didn't care. I lied. And then my mother stood up. She clinked her glass. The room quieted. The sunset made the wine glasses glow. To the son who's made us proud every day of his life, she said, her voice catching just slightly. To Elias, our legacy in the flesh. The room applauded. Maren beamed. Elias dipped his head like a prince receiving tribute. And I sat there, frozen, applauding with hands that felt like lead. She didn't say my name. Not even a nod. Not even a glance. It wasn't an oversight. It was a message. I wasn't just excluded. I was erased. Something shifted in me then. A slow, deep click. Like a lock turning on a door I hadn't opened in years. I stood up. My chair scraped against the polished floor. Every head turned. I raised my glass. You'll remember this night, I said calmly, voice steady. But not for the reason you think. Silence. A beat. Then a few awkward chuckles. Elias smiled like I'd made a joke. I smiled back. Sat down. And in that moment, right there, right then, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I wasn't going to ruin the wedding. I was going to reveal it. Elias and I weren't always like this. There was a time we shared bunk beds, split Oreos by ritual, and took turns using the one flashlight we duct taped to the top bunk's railing. We used to pretend it was our boardroom spotlight, our private little universe where the world ran on invention and imagination, and we were already the kings of it. I remember being 10 and drawing logos in my sketchpad for the companies we swore we'd launch. Greaves and Greaves. He said it sounded like a firm that made decisions, big ones. Elias would pace the room like a CEO on the verge of disruption. "We'll start a company, just the two of us," he'd say. "One that'll make people remember our name." And I believed him. Not because I was the younger brother, 3 years behind and hopelessly loyal, but because back then, he meant it. He used to drag me to the library on weekends, stack our arms with books on business and branding, and then buy us hot chocolate on the way home. He'd read TechCrunch like it was scripture. I'd sketch wireframes on the backs of napkins. We were a team. Always. Until we weren't. I don't remember the exact moment it happened. Maybe you never do. Maybe there isn't a moment, just a slow erosion of belief. 1,000 paper cuts that only sting when the bleeding starts. But I do remember the summer before he left for Yale. He sat on the porch steps, phone buzzing in his hand, eyes shining in that half-cocky, half-distracted way he had when the world was already spinning toward him. I met this guy, Toby Kane, my roommate for the fall. He's into AI, crypto, blockchain, the real stuff. Think we might build something. And just like that, Greaves and Greaves was gone, replaced by the next shiny object. A new co-founder. A better idea. I was still sketching. He was already pitching investors. They launched the app during Elias's junior year. Some fintech thing I didn't fully understand, but admired from a distance. It blew up. News outlets called it innovative. Tech blogs ran headlines about 2 Yale kids disrupting the investment world. I watched from my sophomore dorm at UW, eating ramen and quietly saving every article to a folder on my desktop I named Inspiration. I told people I was proud. And I was. But I was also grieving something I couldn't name. If you're enjoying the story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It won't cost you anything, but it will mean the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video. When the startup sold to a major firm for 7 figures, Elias moved into a luxury penthouse in downtown Seattle. Marble counters, rooftop pool, valet parking. I helped him unpack the day he moved in. He gave me a sweatshirt from the company. That was it. I bought a condo in Capitol Hill with a partial loan and a tight budget. A far cry from his lifestyle, but mine. Cozy, clean, quiet. I made my own coffee. Did my own laundry. Built a reputation in design circles while Elias graced panels and podcasts. We met up occasionally, mostly when Mom guilt-tripped him into checking in on me. He'd pay for brunch. Ask vague questions. Swipe through his phone during my answers. And I'd play my part. The humble one. The quiet one. The less impressive one. It became our unspoken rhythm. He soared. I stayed grounded. I thought maybe this is just adulthood. Maybe that closeness we had as kids wasn't meant to survive the real world. Maybe some bonds don't stretch, they snap. And honestly, I was okay with that. I'd adjusted. I'd made peace with being the moon in his orbit. But then came the wedding. And the toast. The toast that changed everything. You see, it wasn't just about seating charts or being left out of the wedding party. It wasn't even about the insult. It was about the accumulation. The 1,000 moments that led there. The birthday parties where his cake had sparklers and mine had misspelled frosting. The college visits where Mom dragged me around like a side errand while Elias gave tours to donors. The Christmas where he gifted our parents a framed photo of himself at a gala, and they called it iconic, while my hand-carved sculpture earned a distracted "Thanks, Noah." And yet, I showed up. Over and over. Because deep down, there's always that one last ember of hope in the overlooked child. The part that thinks, maybe this time. Maybe they'll see me. But at that wedding, when my mother raised her glass and toasted Elias as our legacy in the flesh, that ember? It went out. No rage. No scene. Just a quiet, icy clarity that settled over me like a switch had flipped. "You'll remember this night," I said, raising my own glass. "But not for the reason you think." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting to be chosen. I was choosing myself. The next morning, the sun was already burning through the Napa Valley mist by the time I slipped out of my suite. From the window, I could see them, bridesmaids in silk robes the color of powdered lavender, squealing over monogrammed gift boxes, fake laughing for Instagram. Waitstaff darted around with trays of grapefruit mimosas and gluten-free muffins shaped like roses. It was wedding day, and I couldn't stomach any of it. The pre-wedding brunch was being held in the West Courtyard. My name was on the guest list, somewhere between an aunt I barely remembered and a groomsman I'd never met. I was supposed to wear a linen shirt, sit through speeches, and pretend like the past 31 years hadn't led to this. A weekend dedicated to making me feel like an outsider in my own bloodline. So I skipped it. I left my name card on the table, untouched, and wandered away from the noise. The resort grounds were vast, manicured gardens, secluded walking paths, fountains carved out of Italian marble. Everything was pristine, curated, fake, the perfect metaphor. I walked aimlessly for a while, trying to clear the static from my head, telling myself not to let it get to me. But my jaw was tight, my fists clenched. I hadn't slept. Not really. My brain had been racing all night, replaying the toast, the applause, the way my mother had looked through me like I was a shadow on the wall. I ended up near the rose garden behind the reception hall. It was quiet there. No music, no chatter. Just the hum of bees and the trickle of water from a marble fountain shaped like an angel pouring from an urn. That's when I saw them. Marin and Toby Kane. They were standing too close. Her back was to me. His face was tight, jaw twitching. She was in a champagne robe, hair already in curls pinned to her scalp like a crown. He wore yesterday's blazer, rumpled like he hadn't slept either. They didn't see me. They were too busy arguing. Her voice was sharp, clipped, like she was trying not to yell. "You said this was handled, Toby. If Elias finds out." His response was lower, rushed. I couldn't make out all of it, just fragments. "Relax, not what you think. You said you'd cover it." And that was all I needed. I ducked behind a hedge before either of them turned. My heart was hammering in my ears. Toby Kane. The same man Elias had chosen over me. The same guy who vanished from the spotlight after their second company, Spin Trek, imploded under suspicious circumstances. There were rumors of fraud, mismanaged funds. I remembered reading the headlines, watching Elias on TV spinning a safe, clean narrative while Toby disappeared into the background like a scapegoat. We all assumed Elias had cut him off, that the partnership was done. So why the hell was he here? And why was Marin, Elias' fiancée, the bride, the one who just yesterday gave me a polite but pointed smile that said stay in your lane, arguing with him like they were in this together? I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo. Nothing dramatic. Just one clean frame of the two of them near the fountain. Her mid-sentence, his hand half raised like he was trying to reason with her. It wasn't much, but it was something. A thread. And I've always been good at pulling threads. I didn't move right away. I waited until they both turned and walked in opposite directions. Her back toward the bridal suite, him toward the resort parking lot. Neither looked particularly victorious. As soon as they were gone, I stepped out from behind the hedge, phone still in hand, mind already buzzing. There was a timeline forming in my head. A crack in the porcelain perfection of this wedding. Something didn't add up. The tension, the secrecy, the panic in Marin's voice. This wasn't about cold feet or a missed payment on the flower arrangements. This was deeper. And knowing Elias, his obsession with appearances, his calculated charm. If he found out Marin was hiding something, if he knew Toby was involved, the whole damn facade would come crashing down. I headed back to my suite, walking fast, barely noticing the couples strolling through the vineyard or the staff fluffing the seat cushions around the ceremony arch. I had one goal now. Find out what the hell Marin and Toby were hiding. Whatever it was, I was certain of one thing. It wasn't small. And if there was even a sliver of corruption tied to Elias, financial, personal, or both, I would find it. Not out of spite, not even out of revenge, but because for the first time in my life, I had leverage. And I wasn't about to waste it. I locked the door behind me as soon as I got to my suite. The room was still half lit, the morning sun casting long shadows across the navy carpet. I hadn't made the bed. My suit for the ceremony hung untouched in the closet. But none of that mattered now. Not the mimosas, not the speeches, not the polished orchestration of a wedding meant to scream perfection. Something was wrong. And I had a photo that proved it. I sat at the desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up my secure work browser. I wasn't just a UX strategist, I specialized in systems, design thinking, patterns. I didn't need a smoking gun. I just needed inconsistencies. I started with the guest list. The resort had sent all guests a custom itinerary via email, something my mother had probably demanded. Brunch, rehearsal, ceremony, reception. I scanned through the list of attendees again, searching for Toby's name. Not there. Interesting. I cross-referenced the seating chart PDF we'd received. Table 3, near the Blackwell family, had a few +1 placeholders and business partner names I vaguely recognized. Still no mention of Toby. So why was he here? I dug deeper. Opened LinkedIn. Searched Toby Kane. His profile was still up, still glossy. Former co-founder of Spintrek, now independent consultant in emerging tech markets. Translation, floating in obscurity. But what caught my eye wasn't his job history. It was his location. Palo Alto, California. Just 60 miles south of where Marin was raised. Just 2 cities over from her family's wine import business. And even more interesting, one of the mutual connections between Toby and Marin's father, a man named Grayson Lyles. I knew that name. A few months ago, Elias had mentioned him during a phone call I wasn't supposed to overhear. Something about new funding rounds, a private lending deal, backdoor investors. The kind of shady arrangements Elias didn't like on paper, but was happy to entertain in whispers. I searched Grayson Lyles, then searched his company, Fundterra Bridge Capital, a shell group, one of those middleman lenders that specialize in discrete restructuring and short-term liquidity optimization. Translation: debt laundering for startups bleeding money, but desperate to stay afloat until the next round. I felt a chill run down my back. I checked the timeline. 3 months ago, Elias told the family he had secured new investment partners. It was part of the story he spun about launching Greaves Ventures 2.0, bigger, global, diversified. He said they were moving into real estate tech, a term vague enough to cover sins. But here's what didn't track. Just 6 months ago, Spintrek's failure had torched his credibility in the industry. Even with the payout from the sale, the collapse had left holes, ones he wouldn't want anyone to find. So what if those new investors weren't new? What if he'd gone back to the only person who still owed him? Toby. And what if Toby, in return, had brokered a deal using Marin as the link? My heart beat faster. I opened my encrypted cloud folder, one I'd kept hidden since the Spintrek fallout. I'd saved every article, every audit, every quietly scrubbed news story about the crash. I compared dates. I zoomed in on wire transfers I'd flagged, but never followed up on. There, a deposit into a holding account under a shell company that traced back to Fundterra Bridge Capital. Then, just 3 weeks later, an investment announcement from Greaves Ventures about acquiring a minority stake in a Bay Area AI-powered property analytics platform. A startup that didn't even have a website yet. I sat back in my chair. The pieces clicked. Elias was funding his new venture with borrowed money. Money funneled through Toby, and likely covered up by Marin's family connections. And judging by the garden argument, something had gone sideways. I pulled up my photo again. Marin's expression. Tight. Panicked. Not the face of someone managing logistics. The face of someone barely holding her world together with designer thread. I checked the resort's wedding planner app. The ceremony was set to start in 2 hours. The reception? 4. That gave me time. I opened a new document and began drafting a timeline. Transaction dates. Public filings. The shell company names. I annotated it all. Then I dragged the photo of Marin and Toby into the top corner like a signature. I didn't want to cause a scene. I wanted undeniable clarity. But just to be sure, I scheduled the email for 6:15 p.m., the precise moment the cake cutting was supposed to happen. Symbolic. The sweetest moment turned bitter. I set the email to send to every guest on the list. BCC'd, blind, automated. No room for denial. No finger-pointing. Just truth laid bare. I sat there a moment longer, the cursor blinking at the bottom of the screen like it was asking me, "Are you sure?" And I was. For 31 years, I had stayed quiet. Sat down when I should have stood up. Clapped when I should have walked away. But not today. Today, I wasn't just the overlooked brother. I was the architect of exposure. And the house of Greaves? It was about to come down. Do you know what betrayal smells like? I do. It smells like vintage roses, lavender sachets, and the faint whiff of smug success. Like the kind that oozes off a man in a $6,000 tux who thinks the universe was made to orbit him. Elias stood at the altar looking like a cover model for Modern Legacy. His jawline was sharp, his hair carefully tousled, and he wore that practiced smile like armor. Warm enough to charm, distant enough to dominate. The orchestra swelled. The crowd swooned. Even the sky had the decency to stay cloudless. It was all so perfect. Until it wasn't. I took my seat at the far edge of row 4, between a woman who'd introduced herself as a client of the Greaves family office, and a florist's assistant who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. I barely noticed them. My attention was on the email confirmation still glowing faintly on my phone's screen in my jacket pocket. The moment of truth. Marin appeared at the top of the aisle like a secret in motion, sleek, radiant, and visibly on edge. Her smile was fragile. Her eyes darted toward Elias like she was begging him to anchor her. He didn't notice. He was too busy playing icon. The vows were short. Memorized. Manufactured. You're my partner, my light, the future I've waited for. He called her my safe harbor. She called him my once-in-a-lifetime. I nearly choked. They kissed. People clapped. Some even cried. But I just sat there, jaw tight, watching the drama unfold behind the curtain of applause. Because I knew something no one else did. Not even my father. And that's what made it worse. Because the money, the seed capital Elias used to fund his second rise, it wasn't just funneled through Toby. It wasn't just shady or borrowed. It was stolen. From Dad. From our family's private fund. A portfolio our father had spent 40 years building through conservative investments, compound interest, and brutal discipline. It wasn't just money. It was his legacy. His pride. Buried in the Funterra Capital docs I'd unearthed the night before was a linked transaction, masked under a holding LLC tied to one of Dad's trust vehicles. Elias had gained access to the credentials a year ago for business consulting purposes. Only there was no consulting. There was just theft. He'd drained nearly $1.7 million, moved it through dummy accounts, and routed it into a fraudulent angel investment in his own startup shell. On paper, it looked like a venture bet made by a third-party investor. But the back end was clear as day once you knew what to look for. He hadn't asked, hadn't disclosed, hadn't even planned to repay it. He'd gambled with our father's life work, all for a second chance at being the golden boy. The man in question, our father Malcolm Greaves, sat in the front row, stiff and proud, clapping slowly. He had no idea. Not yet. But in less than 2 hours he would. I looked at him for a long time. The way he sat straight, trying to convince the room he'd bred perfection. That he'd made sons who became giants. That he hadn't failed me. I wondered what he'd look like when that myth shattered. Cocktail hour passed in a blur of violin covers and clinking glasses. I drifted through the crowd like a ghost. Most people didn't even register I was there. A few guests gave me that awkward half-nod. Like they weren't sure whether to engage or just pretend I was someone's date. I liked it that way. Invisibility, for once, was a shield. I spotted Marin by the bar, sipping champagne like it might steady her nerves. She smiled at guests too brightly, laughed too hard, but every 10 minutes, she glanced around like she expected something to explode. She wasn't wrong. At 6 p.m., the reception hall doors opened. Gold light spilled in from the chandeliers. The floral arches looked like something out of a royal wedding. The 5-tier cake stood in the corner like a monument to excess, decorated with edible orchids and gold leaf. The wedding coordinator gave the signal. The DJ queued up, a sky full of stars, and introduced the wedding party. Then Elias and Marin made their entrance, hand in hand, faces glowing, as if the universe hadn't already started crumbling beneath them. People cheered. Phones came out. Parents beamed. And I took my seat, pulled my phone out, opened the scheduled email. Subject line: before you toast. Inside, timeline of transactions. Screenshots. Trust account withdrawals. A list of shell company transfers. The photo of Marin and Toby arguing by the fountain. One line at the bottom: Not a rumor. Just receipts. I watched the seconds tick down. 6:14 p.m. The MC called for attention. Elias and Marin stood beside the cake, hands clasped on the silver knife. Their smiles were wide. Their world intact. For now. 6:15 p.m. Send. It was almost cinematic. One by one, phones lit up across the room. Heads bowed. Whispers began. Then murmurs. Then sharp inhales. At table 1, I saw Malcolm's phone buzz. He glanced at it casually, like it was a dinner notification. Then he went still. Very still. Marin's father stared at his phone, then at her. His eyes turned cold. His hand clenched around his wine glass. Then came the voice that cut through the hum. Is this a joke? All heads turned toward a man in a gray blazer at table 3. He stood up, holding his phone high like a smoking gun. Someone explain this. Mitch Clapper, an investor, one of Elias's former board members. Elias looked confused. Then, as more people stood, phones in hand, his confidence cracked. He looked at Marin. She looked at Toby, who had wisely vanished. The DJ froze mid-announcement. The photographer lowered his camera. And then our father stood. Slowly. Silently. He walked straight to Elias. Held up his own phone. Looked his eldest son in the eye. You access my account. Elias blinked. What are you talking about? You stole from me. Silence dropped like a guillotine. Marin stepped back, one heel catching on the edge of her gown. Elias reached out to her, reflexively, but she didn't move. Dad, just wait, I can explain. Explain what? The trust account? The falsified investor documents? The fraudulent wires? His voice rose now, the rage finally cracking through years of restraint. You used our family to fund your ego. The guests were no longer pretending not to stare. Half of them had their cameras out. Marin turned pale, then green. She dropped her champagne. Elias stammered. It was temporary, I was going to repay. With what? More lies. And then came the moment I'll never forget. Our father looked over Elias's shoulder. His eyes found me, and for the first time in my entire life, he really saw me. His voice dropped low. Was it you? I nodded once. No shame. No apology. Just truth. They say silence is the loudest sound when the truth finally lands. After Elias' perfect day shattered, the room descended into the kind of chaos you usually only see in nightmares or headlines. Someone knocked over a centerpiece. Glass crunched under expensive shoes. People whispered like they were afraid the truth might catch fire if they said it too loud. But the damage was already done. The toast never happened. The cake never got cut. The bride fled the room, veil still attached, looking like she wanted to evaporate into mist. And Elias? He stood there, blinking into the void, still gripping the cake knife like it might stab the moment back into place. He never saw the storm coming. That's the thing about golden boys. They're so used to being protected, they forget what lightning feels like. The resort staff escorted guests out with tight smiles and frantic apologies. Our father didn't say another word that night. He just handed Elias the phone and pointed toward the courtyard. Call your lawyer. You'll need one. Then he left. And just like that, the fairy tale wedding turned into a crime scene with better lighting. I stayed behind. Sat at my table long after the room had cleared. The music had stopped. The candles burned low. No one rushed me out. No one asked if I was okay. I just sat in the quiet. Let it settle. In the weeks that followed, reality caught up to everyone. My father had his firm's attorneys conduct a full internal audit. The stolen funds totaled nearly $1.7 million, just as I'd uncovered. Not a dime was authorized. Not a cent was defensible. Legally, he could have pressed criminal charges. But instead, he made Elias sign over his assets. The penthouse was sold. The startup dissolved. Every designer suit, every stock option, every secret bonus, liquidated to repay what he took. The last I heard, Elias was living in a sublet apartment in Santa Monica, working remotely for a second-tier VC fund that didn't care about reputations, just survival. The Greaves name still had enough weight to keep him out of prison, but not enough to clean the stain. As for Marin, she had the wedding annulled within 2 weeks. Her family cut ties publicly and quickly, likely to avoid being dragged into the regulatory investigations. She posted one final photo on her Instagram. A blurry sunset with the caption, "Some endings save your life." No ring. No tags. No Elias. My father called me 2 days after everything exploded. His voice was tight, hesitant. "We should talk." We met at a small coffee shop in Capitol Hill. Neutral ground. I ordered a black coffee. He got a tea he didn't touch. For a while, we just sat there. Then he finally spoke. "I failed you." I said nothing. "I've been thinking about it nonstop, looking back. How many of your school events did I miss? How many times did I brush off what you were building while celebrating Elias like he walked on water?" His voice broke for the first time. "Too many to count," I said. Calmly, because I wasn't angry anymore. Just clear. He nodded. Slowly. Like each second hurt. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know, I see it now. I see you. And I'm ashamed of how long it took. That moment didn't fix 31 years. It didn't undo birthdays spent alone or applause that never reached me. But it was a start. An imperfect one. And that was enough for now. We've been meeting once a month ever since. Coffee. Sometimes lunch. Never for too long. But we're building something. Something real. No performative gestures. No fancy speeches. Just presence. Elias and I haven't spoken since. And that's fine. He tried to reach out once. A short message. No apology, just, "I didn't think you had it in you." I didn't reply. Because it wasn't about having it in me. It was about finally choosing myself. I wish I could tell you that things wrapped up with a neat bow. That I rode off into the sunset, vindicated and victorious. But that's not how life works. Some days still sting. Some wounds don't scar clean. I think about the boy who once shared bunk beds and whispered dreams in the dark. The one who used to call me partner. That version of Elias died long before the wedding. The man who stood at that altar wasn't my brother. He was a mask, a monument to ego. And I stopped worshiping that altar the moment I hit send. So where does that leave me? Living. Really living. I'm still in Seattle. Still working in UX, but now consulting on my own terms. I started a small agency with a couple of former colleagues. We're building slowly, sustainably. No fake investors. No stolen money. No lies. Just clean work. Real growth. I bought a cabin north of the city. Quiet place. With beams and lake air. On weekends, I hike and breathe. I read more. I draw again, something I hadn't done since college. And for the first time in my life, I don't feel like a shadow. They used to call me the overlooked brother. Invisible. Unremarkable. Quiet. But here's the truth. Sometimes the quiet ones are just waiting for the right moment to speak. And when they do, they don't just raise a glass. They raise the whole damn truth. So go ahead, make your toasts. Clink your glasses. Smile for the cameras. But know this. The next time you silence someone, they might be the one who burns it all down. I did. And I'm not sorry.